intensity on policy priorities, all of whose emphasis is reducing the achievement gap. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
I'm sorry, is not Uma Alawaya's job. I will stand by that, and I will not yield on that. The county executive certainly is concerned about the achievement gap. The county council is concerned about the achievement gap. The director of HHS, the director of recreation are concerned about the achievement gap. But the achievement gap and educational policy fall under the ambit of the school system. It is the school system's responsibility to give us a plan for reducing the achievement gap. And if the school system comes to us with a plan that says, we think HHS has a role, and we've worked with HHS, and we think this is HHS's role, and we think recreation has a role, and we've worked with recreation, and we think this is recreation's role, I would be open to the school system coming before us with a plan to close the achievement gap, which I hope we'll have soon, in which other agencies having to do with economic determinants and safe neighborhoods and secure after-school opportunities or, food so the kids aren't hungry, I acknowledge that these all play into it. But for you, Uma, to be here now articulating a major policy initiative to close the achievement gap while our distinguished and esteemed colleague, Dr. Starr, in effect sits by and says he won't pay for it, I will not support. I will not support it.
So if I may, I would argue that it's the entire community's responsibility to help us close the achievement gap, and the achievement gap is a manifestation of many of the factors that contribute to kids not being ready in class. And I'm very fortunate to have great partners in the community, including the county executive, who get that. There's a reason why there are so many communities now, very progressive, forward-thinking communities, that are calling it the opportunity gap rather than the achievement gap, because they realize that if we don't have a police department, a rec department, health and human services, faith-based institutions, and others who are all coming together to figure out how we as a community, as public servants, whether we are elected or appointed, can show unity and serve those who are most in need. And if we simply look at where the money is located or whose sole responsibility is, we will not do what our children and our families deserve. Let me be clear about the funding. And I understand the sort of how this could have been described perhaps a little bit differently. We've been deeply immersed in this for a good 2 years. And so, I mean, we talk about this stuff all the time. When we came up with the idea, there's absolutely no doubt that the Montgomery County Public Schools will be providing money when we are, once we get this thing going. The executive, again, and Uma were very supportive of moving it forward. We were initially talking about a lot more money than just $100,000. When it was clear that we wouldn't have the kind of money that we need to leverage some private sector funds, we thought, well, maybe we can just start. So I'll give you an example of what just starting looks like. One thing that has been talked about before, and we have a huge need around, is integration of data systems. We have put forward a new early warning indicator system. It's the only one I know of in the country, quite frankly, that enables us to identify kids who are high risk of dropping out as early as first grade. Those kids also, and their families, might also be involved in other parts of the community and be getting services from UMA, from wherever it may be. We need someone actually full-time to be figuring out how to make things like that work. If it's just 5% of someone's job, 10% of someone's job, it doesn't happen with the kind of speed that we want. And we want to be able to take projects like that, figure out how to align our systems, have full-time attention to it.
Dr.
Right?
Starr?
So if I may just finish on the funding piece. So as we've been talking about wanting to get things like this started, there's absolutely, I can tell you that in my next year's budget, we would absolutely be committing monies to it. We were looking just to get it started, get the ball rolling, and perhaps, and I'll own this, perhaps we should have put the money in there symbolically just to show the commitment that we had. We were considering a bunch of different options that we have. We have grants that come in at different times of the year. Certainly, I've made that commitment to UMA that we will be putting money in once it gets moving. And if we had put the money, if we should have put the money in up front to show our commitment to it, that's fully
Can
on
you
me.
still do that?
But I
If
want
we
to.
fund this, can you still match us?
I'd have to talk to my Board of Education about it, and we have to be clear about what the expectations is. However, if the, and forgive me for saying this, but if the belief is that the sole responsibility of closing the gap and serving our families rests with the Board of Education alone, then any amount of money we put towards it will not be well spent.
I don't
Dr.
agree with
Starr,
that
I'd like to
statement.
reclaim my time. If-
Don't I get to continue? That's my time.
Well,
I
let
allowed
us know
you
when
to
you yield,
cut in.
Mr. Reamer, because a lot of us have. I'm actually chairing this session, but I'll yield to you, Mr. Reamer, and then I'd
get
like,
to
I'd like
continue.
to have the microphone.
You
Go ahead,
may
Mr.
have-
Reamer.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I think it is the county executive's obligation to close the achievement gap. I think it's the county council's obligation to close the achievement gap, and I think it's the superintendent and the Board of Education's obligation to close the achievement gap. We all have roles to play, and we shouldn't let bureaucratic problems get in the way of achieving the goal. Now, having said that, I think that it is important for the school system to we don't know what's going on behind the scenes in your discussions. And it probably is the case that within the parties who are at the table on this initiative, everyone was fine with proceeding according to this plan. I can't say. It seems to be, because when I talked to Chuck Short, he really wants to see this move forward. And he does not see the school system's inability to put it in the budget this year as it being a fatal. At the same time, he wants to see you in, and he wants to see you spending this money. So I'd like to see the council try to bring the parties together and get this done. And I would like you to talk to the Board of Education, please, and see if you can get that funding set in the FY15, because we're trying very hard to fund your budget, or at least, we want to fund your budget, and this is an important initiative. I agree it's not spelled out enough. If there was a couple pages on this, I think we wouldn't have as much controversy about it, but a couple sentences isn't really as persuasive. So, what you can do to help us understand what it is that you're going to accomplish, simply the fact that this money goes to the community foundation is much different than I previously understood. And I can see why it's incumbent upon the council and the county to fund that. And the last thing I'd say is we see this a lot in the Interagency Technology Policy Coordinating Committee, is that everybody says, something should happen, but somebody has to step up and go first. And oftentimes that does fall to the county. And that's okay, that's the way it is. So can you speak to the program again and make your cases for why we should do this?
So if I might just do two quick things. One, there is a very well laid out diagrammatic document that we're happy to share again. I do believe, Vivian, maybe
Does
you
that
already
well laid
have
out
it.
diagrammatic document call for any support, administrative or financial, from MCPS?
Yes. So let me just say that the plan was always, the executive took a very strong position on this. He does take tremendous ownership for the achievement gap and for the social determinants that we all have a role to play in. And he was very clear with us that he wants us to step up and do what needs to be done to make sure that children have the best opportunity to succeed. Having said that, I have maintained all along, MCPS has been at the table from the very beginning. The whole creation, the plan we crafted was a jointly crafted plan. The only reason it shows up in HHS is not because HHS is the lead agency on this. We're all in this together. Was more for the administrative crafting, the administrative ease of moving the money to the vehicle that would then help leverage dollars from both the private sector and for us to host it in this sort of fund, right? That's the only reason that HHS ended up with the. I hope that is not the reason for this not to move forward, because it's not my project. It's a collective. It truly is, in every way possible, a collective effort.
So I'm going to yield my time now. I'd like to make a motion, though, for $50,000 to go on the rec list. And if $100,000 gets the job done, and then I hope our partners can find $50,000 in their budget. And go ahead, Jennifer.
I'm just a little confused. Are you saying instead of 100,000?
Yes, I'm saying instead of $100,000, I'm saying let's put $50,000.
That motion would require a second.
I
That motion would require a second. The motion fails for lack of a second. The committee's recommendation is that we not spend $100,000 in the HHS department to further these goals. At the time, I'm trying to recollect when the Joint Committee discussed this, I don't think anybody from the school system was present, or at least I know nobody spoke, because I spoke quite strongly on this topic, and then our good friend and our esteemed superintendent came and visited with me and expressed concern that he felt I had been critical of our great school system, which I love and admire. And I asked him one-on-one, I don't mean to, talk out of school, as they say, but I asked him, was he willing to fund this? And he said, no, we can't afford it. And now I'm hearing the superintendent say, well, maybe we should have included money in our budget, maybe in the future, maybe I can go back to the board, maybe we really should have. The proposal before the full council now is to delete this $100,000 and place it as a cut on the reconciliation list. I will tell you, we are hungry for cuts here. We're adding a lot, we're not cutting much. And my reaction to my respected director is that this sounds a little vague and half-baked. That's me speaking now. Other states have a funding stream, we don't have one. Other states have a model, we'd like to follow it, we have no idea how it will be paid for. Somehow it will be off the books, we'll attract support from somewhere, we don't know where, and its primary focus will be closing the achievement gap, but the administrative support will come from the HHS department. So I continue to stand by the committee's recommendation, and that's what's before the council now. I don't know how much more time we want to spend on this.
Well, we've got a number of lights on. Let's go to Councilmember Florine.
Well, I have to say this conversation is reminding me a little bit of the conversation we had in the Fed Committee about the workforce investment initiatives. 74 different programs and not necessarily an overarching program to manage all that. I still remain a little mystified about this, at least in the Circle 5 here, we have a description that says it's addressing social determinants that impact the educational achievement gap. I bet we've thought about that already. So I am trying to understand how this is different from what we're doing now. I bet if we were to list all the different programs that we have in groups and nonprofits and so forth that we support, the kinds of things school system worries about, kinds of things UMA worries about, the kind of things Gabe worries about, you do worry about this. What I'm feeling is the need to have some kind of organizational structure for it all. I went to the what's the name of that? The celebration of business support for the school system the other night, which was very nice. We have a lot of private sector support for a lot of what we're doing already, having to do with children ages 0 to 18. There's a lot going on. We don't really, we keep slicing and dicing things different ways, which is a little complicated, especially when we're looking at something without staff having analyzed it. Perhaps they did in the committee. I don't know, because it's not here. I don't think any of us want to suggest that we're opposed to children, or that we're opposed to children's trusts, or we're opposed to looking at this holistically. I think it's at least certainly caught some of us off guard as to what the object is, and how is this any different from saying, let's have a committee to reorganize the deck chairs. Because that's kind of what it sounds like.
Well, hold on for 1 second, Dr. Starr. Let me actually jump in here. Look, so here's the challenge that's before us. Apparently, and this is oftentimes what happens when we have great, meaningfully purposed things that don't involve the council. And I think that that's part of the challenge. Is that in my conversation with Councilmember Navarro, who reminded me that she actually was one of the ones who had mentioned this to many of the stakeholders that are before us and said, hey, this is something